Nick and Laura are coming back for the birth of their child at home, so you need to leave, Antonio declared, his voice ringing with finality. Leave me? I echoed, stunned. Antonio nodded with a smirk. I've always thought life would be better without you. I can't stand people who always have the right arguments like you do. There are other women out there. Just because we've been together for so long doesn't mean we have to stay together. Antonio's words were blunt. Whatever troubles he faces from now on are none of my concern. He might think a good night's sleep will make it all go away, but it won't this time. He needs to be accountable for his own words. I am Scarlett, 55 years old, living with my husband, Antonio, who is 60 and recently retired. He had mentioned wanting to spend his time enjoying his fishing hobby, and he seemed genuinely excited about it. Meanwhile, I run a small apparel company that's doing well enough to support us in a high-rent condominium. Antonio had been supportive, but after he retired, things changed. His routine shifted drastically, and he spent his days lounging around, staying up late, watching TV, or sleeping in. While occasional downtime is fine, his prolonged idleness was worrying. I suggested he should keep a regular schedule, especially at his age, but he brushed it off. I've worked hard all my life. Let me be. Don't tell me what to do, he snapped. Another issue was Antonio's growing boredom. With only a few friends and fishing as his sole hobby, he became increasingly idle and started nitpicking at my housekeeping. I'm not the best at domestic chores, relying on modern conveniences like a cleaning robot and electric cookers to manage. Antonio, however, preferred doing things manually and criticized my use of appliances. One evening, he complained about dinner. Stews need time and attention, not an electric cooker, he grumbled. Even though he hadn't minded before, his complaints grew more frequent and harsh, with comments like, "Stop being lazy, you're so sloppy." I'd try to accommodate him if I had the time, but with my busy work schedule, I couldn't. I suggested that if he had time, he could handle it. When I mentioned this, he retorted, "Just because you work doesn't mean you can act superior." I began to understand why some people divorce later in life, but I endured, remembering how hard we had worked together. However, things reached a boiling point with the announcement of our son Nick's wife, Laura, being pregnant. Nick isn't my biological son, he's Antonio's from a previous marriage, and we got married when Nick was 10. Antonio was thrilled about the pregnancy. It would be our first grandchild. While I was also excited, Antonio's over-the-top joy made me uneasy. I suspected Antonio was caught up in what I called grandparent fever. That's why things had escalated the way they did. Laura, raised by a single mother, had mentioned she wanted to give birth at home. Antonio, eager to ensure everything was perfect for the baby's arrival, threw himself into preparations with unrestrained enthusiasm. But instead of sharing the load, he imposed all the tasks on me, assembling the crib, stocking up on various types of milk, and buying an excessive amount of diapers. He barked orders at me while I was already overwhelmed with work and daily chores. When I tried to keep up, nothing seemed to meet his expectations. "No, not like that," he'd complain. No, that's not right. Enough already. I understand you're excited, but if you want it done your way, do it yourself. Stop relying on me for everything." His reaction to my resistance was one of shock. He stood frozen, hurt and frustrated. "Our first grandchild, and you act so detached. You're not biologically related to Nick, so you don't care about him." "That's not true," I snapped back. "Don't say such awful things. You're going overboard. If Laura knew how much you're doing, she might not even want to come here. This place doesn't feel relaxing at all." Antonio tried to respond but couldn't find the words. Frustrated, he retreated to his room. Damn it, I didn't mean to go that far, I thought. His obsession had made me stubborn, and his harsh words about Nick had hurt. I wanted Nick and Laura to feel welcome here, so I needed to put a stop to Antonio's excesses. I considered apologizing later, but when I checked, Antonio remained locked in his room. Reluctantly, I left a note saying, "I'm sorry about yesterday, I'm heading to work." That day, work was a mess, and I got home late. I found myself wondering what to make for dinner. To my surprise, Antonio was already seated at the dining table, waiting. "I'm home, sorry for the delay. I'll get dinner ready as quickly as I can," I said. Antonio didn't respond. I hurriedly prepared crispy fish sandwiches and served them. "Sorry for the wait, let's eat." Antonio started eating silently, finishing his sandwich before I'd even halfway through mine. He then sat up straight and looked at me. "What?" I asked, feeling uneasy. Antonio spoke quietly but firmly. You're all about work and neglecting housework. What? His unexpected comment nearly made me drop my sandwich. I'm not neglecting anything. Don't act like it's nothing. Today's meal was just sandwiches because you were so eager to eat. Antonio wasn't convinced. It's not just that. You always dismiss everything I say or do. You must think you're superior just because you're working and I'm retired. That's not how I see it at all. I insisted. Despite my repeated denials, Antonio remained unconvinced. I was growing tired of the argument. Let's end this. We'll be welcoming Nick and Laura soon. I don't want to greet them with this tension. Antonio sneered sarcastically. I've been thinking the same. I found a solution. A solution? I asked, puzzled. Antonio declared loudly. Nick and Laura are coming back for the birth, so you should leave. What? I was stunned, unable to believe he was serious. Leave me? I asked again, my voice trembling. Antonio nodded with a smirk. If you weren't here, everything would run more smoothly. I've always thought so. I can't stand people like you who argue with logic. There are plenty of other women. I was stunned. After decades of marriage, hearing such words was unimaginable. Antonio, carried away by his anger, continued to vent his frustrations. You lack respect for me as your husband. You're always complaining and never just listening. I try to respect your requests as much as I can. It's you who makes unreasonable demands. I countered. Oh, shut up. I hate your bossy tone. Just leave. I don't even want to see your face. Antonio slammed his hand on the table. It was clear that further discussion would be pointless. Understood, I said, and went back to my room. The next morning, I called a moving company. After being treated like that, I had no intention of staying. Fortunately, it wasn't moving season, so I managed to schedule an estimate quickly. I hoped to complete the move while Antonio was out, but he was usually home. I worried about the timing until fate seemed to intervene. I'm going out tomorrow for a bit, Antonio announced. He had been invited by his fishing buddies for an overnight trip. This was my opportunity. There was an awkward tension between us. Maybe Antonio sensed that his words from yesterday were too harsh. Still, he didn't offer any apology, possibly hoping to act as if nothing had happened. He's always been like that. I've usually let things slide, but I couldn't ignore what he said this time. The moving estimate was arranged swiftly. I planned to take all the furniture and appliances with me, but it turned out I had less to move than I expected. The bigger challenge was finding a new place, but that was quickly resolved. A work acquaintance offered me a brand new place to stay. Are you sure? I asked, still uncertain. They assured me. Scarlett, you've been so helpful. So, I accepted the offer. I visited the property, and it was perfect, more than adequate for my needs. I managed to move everything out while Antonio was away. His harsh words had left me feeling resolute, and perhaps, deep down, I had grown weary of life with him. That night, after I'd moved, Antonio called. Here it comes, I thought, picking up the phone. Hello. Hey, Scarlett, what's going on? Antonio's voice was tinged with panic. I almost laughed but kept my tone steady. What do you mean? My house, it's empty. What happened? Well, you told me to leave, so I did. I took everything, from the latest appliances to my favorite dining table. But I only told you to leave. It's insane to take everything. Leaving them behind would have been crazy. I bought all of that with my own money. You never contributed, saying you didn't need them. Antonio was silent for a moment, then grudgingly said, Fine, Nick and his family are coming tomorrow. Furniture doesn't matter. He'd be surprised when he saw the place now. Good, perfect timing then. Say hi to Nick for me. I didn't see the point in continuing the conversation, so I ended the call quickly. There was another significant matter, but Antonio seemed unaware, so I left it unsaid. The next day, Nick called. We'll be there soon. Didn't Antonio tell you I've moved out? Really? Nick sounded surprised but not particularly shocked. In fact, he seemed more relieved than anything. Great, Mom's not there, so we can do what we want. You're not coming back, right? That's right. I'd always sensed that Nick found me bothersome. He didn't seem pleased with me, perhaps because I didn't pamper him the way a biological mother might have. You're not as kind as other women, he'd said as a child. I'd tried to raise him with love and support, hoping to prepare him for life. Well, it's easier for both of us. Laura's uncomfortable too. See you. That remark was just like his father, always adding unnecessary comments. After hanging up, I reflected on this. I felt a bit unsettled that day, struggling to focus on work. I half expected a call about the furniture and appliances. As Laura had once remarked on how nice it must be to have all these conveniences, I suspected their visit might have been to take advantage of that, but contrary to my expectations, no call came. By the end of the month, Antonio called again. "Ah, Scarlett." His tone lacked confidence, making his purpose clear, but I pretended not to understand. "Yes? It's about the rent." "Yes, what about it?" Antonio hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing it. "We used to split the $1,700 condo rent, but I was the one who paid it all. With Antonio now retired, it was unlikely he could afford it long term. He might manage for a while with his retirement fund, but it wouldn't last forever." I waited for him to speak up. "What? You're not expecting me to pay for the rent on a condo I don't even live in, are you?" No, that's not. You were the one who insisted I leave, right? And now you're coming back to me." Antonio's pride wouldn't let him admit that he was asking for help. True to form, he changed the subject. "Scarlett, how are you managing, with finding a place to live?" "Yes, thanks to some connections. I found a place and I'm living comfortably." I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't considering returning. Still, I kept my tone neutral just in case. "Oh, okay. Nick and Laura mentioned they miss you. I thought maybe you'd consider coming back." Antonio's words were out of character. He must be really desperate, but I had no intention of going back. "Oh, really? I thought they didn't like me." No, that's not. "Well, it doesn't matter. I have something important to discuss, so I'll come over." "Okay." Antonio seemed relieved, and his response was overly enthusiastic. I had a crucial matter to address for my future. Later, I visited the condo for the first time in a while. "Long time no see," Antonio said, dressed up as if it made a difference. I walked down the hall to the living room, where Nick and Laura were sitting. The place had been furnished with new sofas, tables, and a fridge. Nick waved casually, while Laura gave me a sharp look. The atmosphere was tense. I wanted to get to the point and leave quickly. I took a seat as Antonio gestured for me to. "So, what did you want to talk about?" I was relieved he brought it up. It was better to deal with these matters sooner rather than later. Antonio's face went pale when he saw the divorce papers I held out. "You're planning to divorce me?" He was visibly shaken. "Yes, ever since you told me to leave, I've been planning this." "Did you really say that without thinking?" Antonio fell silent. It was clear he'd spoken in the heat of the moment, as he often did, which had caused him trouble at work before. "When you said all those terrible things, I don't want to see your face. There are other women, and more, I couldn't see a future with you anymore." Antonio kept his head down, clearly embarrassed and sweating. "Yeah, I said those things, but that's not really what I meant. You can't just say things like that and expect them to be forgotten." I'm appalled. "Well, it doesn't matter to me anymore." I was taken aback by his indifference. "I can't continue this, that's all there is to it." Antonio flinched as our eyes met, quickly looking away. "Can't you reconsider? We've been through so much together. I've endured a lot only to be told such things. I can't stay with you anymore." Antonio sighed deeply, and a heavy silence filled the room. Surprisingly, it was Laura who finally broke the silence. "Excuse me, but I'm the one who's been most inconvenienced here." I turned to Laura, who glared at me with clear resentment. "What do you mean?" "I expected this place to be perfect with you around, clean and filled with the latest appliances. I came here hoping for some pampering, but instead, I'm caught up in this marital mess. It's incredibly frustrating." Laura sighed heavily, her frustration evident. She seemed upset that I wasn't meeting her princess-like expectations. "That's a huge misunderstanding. If you're unhappy, you could go back to your own home or anywhere else, but you chose to stay here." Laura's face turned red with anger. "What's with that attitude? I came all the way here for you. I never asked you to come." Laura's anger boiled over, and she was on the verge of screaming. Her heavy breathing indicated just how upset she was. "But this is absurd. I had such high hopes after talking to Antonio, and now this, it's too much." Laura finally burst into tears. Nick tried to comfort her, but it felt pointless. Antonio's excessive excitement about becoming a grandparent had clearly been driven by Laura's expectations. He'd gotten carried away. But that didn't change the situation. Laura was inconsolable, and Antonio remained frozen, sweating. There's no point in staying here. I'm leaving. We'll settle the divorce through lawyers. As I stood up, Nick shouted, "You're just running away, avoiding your responsibilities and causing trouble." I was stunned by his audacity. Is holding a grudge so important to you? I approached Nick, who was seated close to Laura, and found myself looking down at him. What's the issue? How old do you think you are? I'm 35 years old. I took a deep breath and glared at him. So what responsibility do you think I have? To take care of a 35-year-old son and his wife or a 60-year-old husband? Nick was left speechless, his eyes wide. I couldn't hold back any longer. You're all adults. Enough is enough. Who's really causing trouble here? Using my efforts as a stepping stone while expecting me to always smile and comply? Oh, calm down, Mom, don't act like a child. I shouted until I was out of breath, then paused to catch my breath. At least, Nick, I always cared for you and raised you as my own, but maybe I didn't show it as well as I thought. Nick started to say something but fell silent. I grabbed my things and left the room quickly, and no one followed. Later, Antonio agreed to the divorce without asking for alimony and mentioned he'd be moving out since he couldn't afford the condo. Antonio had never done housework before, so living alone would be challenging for him. The divorce letter I received from him, written in his familiar handwriting, simply said, "Thank you for everything." He tried to reconcile, but I firmly refused, and he seemed depressed. Nick and Laura decided to return to Laura's family home. Laura complained, but Nick persuaded her to go. After the divorce, Nick called once. "I'm sorry for everything. I'll try to be a parent like you," he said shyly. Maybe Nick hadn't hated me as much as I'd thought. I ended up buying the new house I was renting and still live there. Work is going well, though I was tired right after the divorce. I now feel refreshed. It's nice not having to take care of anyone. I'm not sure how many years I have left to work, but I'll do my best while enjoying my private life. And secretly, I still wish for Nick's happiness.